Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I want to talk about using narrative theory in a way to explain one of the aspects of writing advice that you frequently hear. And the piece of writing advice is don't open with a dream sequence. And it lies to your reader about what the story is about. That's one of the ways that it gets explained. Narrative theory is not necessary because, as a beginning writer, you sort of go, okay, fine, I can follow the advice. But the issue with this is the advice itself is kind of an aide memoir, a synopsis, a bumper sticker for an entire concept. And if you understand the concept, if you understand the effects that it is governing, then you can understand the applicability of it and also understand how to circumvent it and how to play with it. So let's think about why writers are advised not to open with a dream sequence. And the reason being, if the opening of your story is to establish the story world, to establish the main character, to establish what is going on, and particularly in science fiction and fantasy, in which you cannot have an assumed base level for the narrative. If it was set in modern day Miami, modern day London, modern day Chicago, if that is where your story is set, you can assume a base level understanding of the diegesis and of the story world because it's our world. But in science fiction and fantasy, because a reader will not know what you have changed, what you have designed, what you have created, they are operating in a white space, in a blank space, and they don't know what is going to be going on. They don't know what is possible in this world. So if the opening is to establish that, then opening with something that has different laws, rules, realities can have the effect of confusing the reader because they are entering into this narrative. They see that this is what's happening. They assume that this is the main diegetic level. It's an exploration, an establishment of the story world. And then it turns out it's a dream sequence. And they go, well, do I just throw all of that away? What is the main world? And you can see it can lead, in certain circumstances, to reader confusion or readers feeling let down or, in extreme circumstances, lied to. Oh, none of it was real. It's, spoiler alert, none of it's real. It's fiction. But you can see that when we read fiction, we have this conceit that is being applied, that readers agree to, that an author has created something that is unreal, but they are going to tell it in a way, and we are going to assume that this is real for a certain level of reality. So why bring in narrative theory? And one of the reasons for this is I referred to the diegetic level. And the diegetic level is the main level on which a story operates. So if we think about it this way, if I tell you a story, if I narrate a story to you, I'm in this position and the story operates below my level of reality because I'm narrating a story to you, then I create a diegetic level. And if in that diegetic level, a character narrates a story, they create a diegetic level below them, which we would call the hypodiegetic level. And if a character within that hypodiegetic level creates a story, then you create a hypodiegetic level. And it's a nice sort of nesting doll idea of how to understand the different levels of reality, the different levels of story world that are being created. And because of that, it's a nice, neat, logical idea that helps us break apart and understand the relationship between things. So when we think of dreams or portents or omens, these are things that the character's magical ability or their subconscious or something is creating in their internal landscape. So they are a character in the diegetic level, and essentially are the narrator of this new narrative that is being created. It's a hypodiegetic level. So when people say don't open with a dream, it's don't open with a hypodiegetic level, especially if your intention is to establish the diegesis. Because what you're doing is you're throwing the reader into a hypodiegetic level, and that may not operate on the same rules as your diegetic level. So we see that the advice itself, it's not just about dreams, but portents, omens, anything that is a construct within the world that is not tangible. So, for instance, if in the main diegetic sequence, someone gets a vision, we can think about it in terms of they are the narrator of that vision. And that's what we as reader are getting a glimpse of. Because they are the narrator of that vision, it is a hypodiegetic level. And you can see how this neatly describes the act of these different levels of engagement, these different levels of reality, and how authors can then, because they are aware of them, find ways around just don't do it. Because that's a very limiting and prescriptive rule. Whereas it's understand that if that is the establishment of the rules of your fictive reality, and it's actually an embedded narrative within the fictive reality, you're not establishing the fictive reality. And that's why the rule kind of exists. Now, that doesn't mean that you should never, ever do it. There are ways around it. One of the most obvious, and I'm not in any way suggesting this is the best way to do it, but if a story opened with a character tossing and turning in bed, talking in their sleep, obviously upset, and then in the next paragraph, it shifted to italics, the reader instinctively understands that what they are reading in italics is in the mind of the person asleep. You can actually play with this. So you're using the first paragraph in normal font to establish this is reality, the fictive reality, the diegetic level of the book. And what we're now seeing is the interior of this mind, and that is going to be different. That is a different level of reality. It is a hypodiegetic level. And that way, you communicate to your reader these different levels. So you can see how this sort of explains that process. It's not you can't have a dream sequence or you shouldn't use a dream sequence. It's understand this effect on readers, particularly in the opening of a novel where they may not know what the diegetic level is, how the reality functions. And if you want your reader to be discombobulated, to communicate that, then that's one of the reasons why you might start with a dream sequence. But you will understand that some readers will be confused. Some readers will not like this. And therefore, some readers are going to feel cheated. And if you're okay with that, then you can understand, right, that I'm going to have a drop off of readership. They're not going to enjoy this, but I'm okay with that. This is for those other readers who wanted this experience. And so if you're aiming at pleasing the greatest number of people, this would be a very bad tactic to use. But if you think about it, if you think about how these different levels are being expressed, how a reader is engaging with them, and the level of reader knowledge that your assumed reader has, then you can find different ways in and around to bending this rule. And it's not just about dreams, as I said, it's about other sequences as well that are creating hypodiegetic levels. So if we think about frame narratives are an interesting aspect of this. In a frame narrative, you establish, say, a character is talking to another character and they're about to recount what happens, or there's an act like they open a book and the implication is we are now going to read what was in that book. That is a frame narrative that is establishing a diegetic level, and it may or may not be the main level for the story, but it's establishing a diegetic level. And what follows is essentially going to be a hypodiegetic level. And so different rules can apply to the different levels of reality. So frame narratives quite often can establish a baseline, and then what follows is going to be something else. So if we think of Arabian Nights, the idea of someone in captivity telling stories every single night, we get that there's one narrative that is happening on one level, the main diegetic level. Shahrazad's doing. And then we have the embedded stories. These are happening on a hypodiegetic level. The characters in the main level cannot physically touch the things that are happening, the stories being recounted. Those are stories that are being told, but we are now going to, as readers, assume the conceit of we're going to follow along as if these things are happening. But there is a difference in level here. The characters aren't interacting. And that takes us on to metalepsis, where there is a breakdown and a collapse of the diegetic levels. We see this in the never-ending story, where Bastian is in one world. He is reading a book. We know this. This is in the text. And as he reads it, we then transition to reading what he is actually reading. And it's, say, the adventure of Atreyu. So we're reading about Atreyu and we're imagining all the things happening to Atreyu because that's what Bastian is doing. Bastian is reading about Atreyu. So we have Bastian on the diegetic level and we have Atreyu on the hypodiegetic level. But at the end of the never-ending story, spoiler for the never-ending story if you haven't read it or seen the adaptation, there is a collapse of these different levels, and Atreyu can communicate directly with Bastian. There's a breakdown of these levels, and suddenly they are operating in the same fictive reality. That is hard to get right unless you understand how these different levels are operating. And the concept of diegetic levels is actually very, very useful in helping both readers and authors understand the relationship between the different fictive realities that they are creating. If we take an example of something like Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, it's set in Chicago, but the realms of fairy, where the fairy courts are, that is all part of the same diegetic level. But if Harry has a premonition and he sees something in his mind, that is actually on the hypodiegetic level. It's relatively straightforward once you wrap your head around it because it's not a natural way to think about stories. We think if we dream, but I'm dreaming and I'm in the main diegetic level, therefore the dream is in the main diegetic level. But it's not. You can't actually, with your physical hand, reach into the dream. The dream is being created by you, therefore it's a different level. And then if you have, because of magic in your world or technology in your world, a way to interact with the dream, that is playing with that breakdown between the diegetic levels and you're playing with metalepsis. So it's a simple, well, I think a relatively simple, straightforward concept that helps us as readers understand what is going on. And so when we apply it to rules like don't open with a dream, we now understand why. Because if the effect is about establishing the story world, establishing the main diegetic level, then opening with a dream is in contravention of that. And so if we are going to open with a dream, we are aware that it's not establishing the main diegesis. It's not establishing the story world. What is its purpose then? What is it establishing? Why is it there? Is it to establish tone, atmosphere? Is it to provide something strange? Is it to unsettle the reader? These are all different effects that we would have to consider about why we would choose to open a story this way, or why, when we are reading, an author would choose to open a story this way, because it's clearly not the standard opening. So I hope that you find this interesting. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I will see you in the next one.